Good afternoon. On behalf of the Center for Community Progress, I'd like to welcome you to today's Cornerstone webinar. My name is Justin Goddard, and I serve as the Associate Director for National Leadership and Education here at Community Progress. Cornerstone is our webinar series which equips participants with the building blocks to understand and solve tough challenges related to property vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration. For today's Cornerstone, we're joined by Liz Kozub and Joe Doolin. Liz Kozub serves as the Associate Director of National Technical Assistance at the Center for Community Progress. In her role, she works directly with local government decision makers, grassroots leaders, and other community stakeholders across the country to deliver a range of technical assistance and capacity building services to urban, rural, and suburban communities. Joe Doolin serves as a director of the Community Development Department for the city of Peoria, Illinois. In this role, Joe oversees the Code Enforcement Division, Building Safety Division, Neighborhood Division, Land Bank Division, Grants Division, and Planning Division. He is a lifelong resident of Peoria who has a passion for serving the public and improving community. Before turning it over to our speakers, I want to mention that we will allow time at the end of the presentation to answer questions. If you have a question during the presentation, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your webinar browser and type your question into the Q&A box. We will share presentation slides and a video recording of today's presentation in the week following. If you experience any technical difficulties, please send us a message by clicking on the chat icon at the bottom of your browser or by sending an email to myself at jgoddard@communityprogress.org. And with that, I am happy to turn it over to my colleague, Liz.
Great, thank you so much, Justin. Give me just a moment to pop this on my screen here. Awesome. Thanks again, Justin. I'm really excited that you all have decided to take the next hour or so to learn about equitable code enforcement practices and how we can work to strengthen our code enforcement efforts. I'm really excited to be sharing the stage with Joe today. And so I'm going to keep my remarks fairly short because Joe has a wealth of experience and innovative practices that he is going to share with us all. So today's presentation is focused on how communities can achieve a more equitable and effective code enforcement practices by strengthening relationships with residents and community members and different stakeholders across the communities that they're working in. And it's important to note that when we're talking about code enforcement, we're talking about an entire system of laws and policies that various local governments use, that folks in the public and private sectors use as well to ensure healthy and safe neighborhoods. The code enforcement officers are really critical and foundational pieces to an effective code enforcement process. They are the folks that are on the ground. They have deep relationships with community members in the spaces that they're working. But they're not the only departments and individuals that are also working to ensure healthy and safe neighborhoods and properties. Communities have economic development departments, they have data and IT people, they have city attorneys' offices, judges, other city staff that are all working together in this ecosystem of addressing property challenges and working towards community health and safety. So it's just important to kind of note that up front. And code enforcement can be a really powerful tool to hold negligent property owners, and especially those that are intentionally negligent, responsible for the harms that they're doing and imposing on communities and community members. And it can also be a way that the public can compel the transfer of those properties to new responsible ownership so that they can be fixed up and put back into productive use. We at Community Progress have been really encouraged by a number of communities across the country that are rethinking their use of code enforcement and kind of retooling their operations and moving from efforts that are strictly punitive to efforts that have supportive measures built in place for those neighbors and neighborhoods that really need that additional support and additional capacity. So this can come in the form of providing educational materials to homeowners. It can be providing linkages to social services like repair grants and repair loans. It could be bringing those services directly to residents and community members through community sweeps and intentional outreach. And what we're seeing is that as code enforcements are kind of looking to shift their mindset and culture and operations to provide this kind of varying level of outreach to communities that range from punitive to supportive, that they're seeing some really successful outcomes from that work. So much like many local government operations, code enforcement continues to be pretty under-resourced. And in many of the communities that we work in, there's simply not enough money or not enough time to address all of the properties that have some significant health and safety concerns. So because of that, it's really important for code enforcement operations to be strategic and to be intentional about the plan and the goals that they're hoping to achieve. So the first start in determining what it is that your community goals should be in terms of code enforcement operation is really getting a good understanding of the challenges of vacancy, abandonment, and property deterioration that you're working to solve. And quality data is really essential in understanding that scope and scale and nature of the problem. So maybe your community is seeing an increase of vacant properties in a particular neighborhood over the past 5 years. So the trends are showing vacancy is increasing. You might want to devote some time and resources to prevent that decline from happening further. Or your community might be seeing an increase in a certain type of violation. So it could be that you're seeing more porches collapse because of an aging housing stock. So a goal might be to provide linkages to those social services or to set aside some type of public funding to address the conditions of those particular properties. So really understanding your data in order to develop goals is an important piece to this work. Data can also be used to measure the impacts of your code enforcement efforts. So taking a look as to whether or not your operations are effective, are they efficient, and are they reaching equitable outcomes? And we'll talk about that in just a moment. It's also important to take an inventory of the legal and policy tools that you have in place and whether or not they're going to help you reach those intended goals that you've laid out. And importantly, and kind of some of the thrust of this conversation today is really understanding the community's perception about what code enforcement is currently doing and what it should be doing and what powers code enforcement has to improve communities is really important. Misunderstanding and misperceptions can be roadblocks for progress. And so I'm excited to have Joe on the call. We'll certainly learn from how Peoria is adapting to public perception and the work that he and his team are doing to strengthen those relationships with community members. So I mentioned the 3 elements of code enforcement are to be effective, efficient, and in pursuit of equitable outcomes. So what do we mean by that? Effective code enforcement means that the code enforcement strategies are tailored to the likelihood of compliance and those desired outcomes that you're hoping to achieve. Understanding neighborhood markets is really foundational to understanding effectiveness of code enforcement, especially if in order to remediate some of the issues at the property, there's going to be some substantial investments to the rehab or repairs of that property. It's also important to understanding economic realities of the individuals in the communities that code enforcement is working. So giving somebody a really heavy fine to fix up an issue when they don't even have the financial resources to address the actual problem likely isn't going to achieve your desired outcomes. Code enforcement should also be efficient. Time is money, we've heard that saying before, and voluntary compliance with the least amount of local government interventions is really the most efficient process. But I saw a few names on the call today, and you all know that the code enforcement process can be pretty messy and pretty time intensive. And so teasing out some of those inefficiencies in process and policy can be really helpful to your code enforcement efforts. And instituting a process like fix it up, pay it up, or give it up on vacant properties can be an efficient process to follow. And Community Progress has some resources on that kind of theory of work and practice of work. So happy to provide that if folks are interested. Lastly, code enforcement needs to be in pursuit of equitable outcomes. We have a history of racist laws and policies in this country that has led to community disinvestment and a concentration of vacant and abandoned properties, particularly in communities of color. From redlining to urban renewal and blockbusting, these practices have prevented communities and people from gaining access to really necessary resources and capital to ensure a healthy and safe housing and property stock. And priority areas of focus for code enforcement are typically concentrated in low-income communities and communities of color because of that decades of disinvestment. So centering that historical context and also applying current realities such as ownership types, vacancy status, financial situations of individuals is really important to achieve those equitable outcomes. And I want to pause and just say that this really is a paradigm shift, and it's not easy. There's no community that has like a perfect model for equitable code enforcement system, but places are taking the necessary steps to think through their processes through an equity lens and try to move towards that more equitable system. So the city of Syracuse is currently exploring opportunities to change code enforcement culture. They're looking into trainings on implicit bias and racial justice for their inspectors. The city of Louisville has an equity first framework, and they're working through that framework with their code enforcement department to try to operationalize it. Brooklyn Park, Minnesota has established an inspector training over 6 years ago that not only prioritizes racial equity, but also encourages inspectors to decline calls if they think that the complaint was racially motivated. So code enforcement can be a really powerful tool, as I mentioned, to address the health and safety issues that might be present in a particular neighborhood. But when equity is not centered, it can lead to unintended consequences and have some disparate impacts for certain populations. And I just appreciate everybody's interest in working towards a more equitable system. And I enjoy learning from folks like Joe and from all of you across the country that are doing this important work in your own communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Justin, for hosting and having Peoria talk about its programs today. I think that, we really appreciate all of the work that the Center for Community Progress does, and appreciate kind of their commitment to publicizing these issues and really getting everyone connected on best practices for code enforcement and dealing with vacant and abandoned property throughout the country. I'm going to focus a little today on code enforcement, specifically our engagement education efforts. It's not really going to get into the processes of how we do code enforcement. I could spend hours on that as well, but specifically kind of our engagement and education efforts. For those that aren't aware, Peoria is in central Illinois, population about 113,000 people, spread out over 48 square miles. We're like a lot of older cities where we've grown and have some suburban sprawl, where our urban core has seen a lot of disinvestment, which can lead to an older housing stock having a lot of housing issues. So our community development department, our code enforcement division is in our community development department. It's made up of, we have 12 full-time code inspectors, some temp summer help to help with environmental issues, a neighborhood enhancement coordinator, some legal staff. But the most important thing, we try to incorporate the entire department in kind of every effort we do: code enforcement, building safety, our neighborhood activities. So it really takes a team effort. I do want to focus a little bit on throughout my research and seeing what other communities have done with code enforcement. Sometimes you see them in a public works department, a police department, or a fire department. And my personal opinion is code enforcement as a function very much belongs in a community development department. While those other organizations do great work, their focus is not necessarily on community development. At the end of the day, your public works staff is going to be focused on infrastructure, your police is going to be focused on crime, and fire is going to be focused on fire. So often code enforcement is an afterthought of the great work that they can do. So we feel the best structure for us is to have code enforcement as a part of our community development, because that is essentially what they do on a daily basis. How do we do code enforcement? Well, we try to educate and engage first, followed up with effective enforcement. I'm going to talk really about our engagement and education efforts, but I don't want for anyone on this call to think that then we don't follow up with effective enforcement when those methods don't happen. Every successful code program needs to work on engaging residents to prevent code violations from happening in the first place. But once they do happen and you have those habitual offenders, you have to have the tools to be able to address them. We do, but we really won't be going into detail today for those. And I know sometimes in the code enforcement world, every city does it a little different. Our code enforcement staff deals with environmental property maintenance. Those are your everyday tall grass, weeds, litter, limbs, debris issues, as well as kind of exterior and interior property maintenance of properties. So, I appreciate the Center for Community Progress for having us talk about this. And I kind of want to frame why we started going down this route with our service delivery and why we felt this was important. One of the things we've really seen a trend in not just our world, but in every world is the impact social media can have on everything. And I think in the code enforcement world, it's no different. One person who you might have gotten 6 tickets for tall grass because they never cut their grass, it's 2 feet tall, it's causing rats, it's causing all sorts of issues. They can make one post on Facebook and everyone starts piling on about, oh yeah, this person did this, or I heard about that, I heard about this. And, it's not appropriate for city staff to engage or to set the record straight with what the actual facts of the situation are. So we're fighting sometimes ghosts that don't exist because we can't go on there and really kind of clear the air of what we're really trying to accomplish. So really whatever we can do up front to create allies in the community who can be our spokesperson when stuff like that happen is good. And with social media just continuing to develop over the years, it's just the more allies you can have in the community who can defend you when things like that come up, the better. The other thing is about 5 or 6 years ago, the city of Peoria engaged in a national citizen survey. The results absolutely kind of broke my heart. I think our approval rating in the community was about 34 or 35%. But what I found out and what they told us is that's about average. The national average for approval rating for code enforcement divisions throughout the country is in that 30 to 45% range. And it's heartbreaking from a sense to know how hard our staff works, how engaged they are, how committed they are to the public. But that approval just isn't there. So what that tells me is we're not doing a good enough job telling our story and telling about the things and the value we bring. So we need to do a better job of that. In addition to the city of Peoria, we had an aging workforce. So we knew we were going to have some retirements. So we knew the next generation of staff we bring in, we need to be able to hire with the right mindset that they're public servants first and then city personnel second. I have the joy of being the boss for so many fantastic employees that I've had the luxury of hiring over my tenure with the city, about 90 to 95% of them. And one of the questions on every interview panel I ask is, what does it mean to you to be a public servant? And why do you want to be a public servant? And I think that question gets to the heart of what we do on a daily basis. If they know that they're committed to serving the public and they need to go do whatever they can to provide that service, and that's their number one mission, then we can, no matter what kind of outcome we get to, we know we'll get to a good outcome. Also, just what we've been doing hadn't been working. We haven't been seeing positive progressive change in our community over the years of doing the traditional code enforcement work, especially with the lack of resources that continue to get smaller and smaller every year. So we started this transformation 5 or 6 years ago with a lot of process improvement training for our staff. But we also challenge our staff to really kind of look at self in the mirror and define who they want to be. So I wasn't involved in this process because we had a couple staff members run it, so it didn't look like I was pushing one way or the other. About 70% of the department attended by choice. It was optional. And they came up with the new mission statement that we were going to go by and move forward. And that's striving to educate, encourage, and serve community members to create a healthier, more positive Peoria. So, what makes a great code enforcement division in our eyes? The number one thing is believe in your mission. If every staff is committed to that mission, continue to push that forward, you'll be successful. But with that, I think it's really important on calls like this, with so many advocates and allies who believe in code enforcement on this call, you have to continue to tell the story again and again and again of the value you bring to the community. I think one of the biggest disservices we all do to the code enforcement and community development world is we undersell the value we can bring to a community. The things we're doing on a daily basis bring about life safety issues, public safety issues, maintaining property values, improving community health, beautifying neighborhoods, building and maintaining our neighborhoods, creating safe and affordable housing for all the residents, business and citizen attraction, and making the community vibrant and fun. Where we do ourselves the biggest disservice is every year during budget processes, the fire department and police departments of your community, who I'm sure do fantastic work, do a much better job of selling themselves and selling the value they bring to a community. So if you look at cuts that get made, sometimes community development and code enforcement is seen as a luxury for a department in a city that needs to experience those cuts. And if you've been telling this story and telling this mission time and time again, hopefully you've built those allies and advocates who can stick up for you and say the value you do. I love our police departments. I love our fire departments. Most of the time, fire departments do a fantastic job putting out fires. Code enforcement staff can prevent those fires from occurring by robust code enforcement of making sure properties are maintained. Police departments do a fantastic job of solving crime. Code enforcement divisions can do a wonderful job of improving neighborhoods and reducing crime rate. There's multiple studies that show out there that show a vibrant demolition and robust demolition program getting rid of boarded properties leads to a direct result in reduced gun violence. Telling that story, so when it comes time to allocate resources, code enforcement and neighborhood improvement are at the forefront of that discussion, is something everyone on this call needs to continue to do year after year after year. So code encouragement, what does that mean for us? You know, not only do the programs we run, this is kind of when we do our programs, this is what the mindset we have. We make sure citizens understand that we are a team, we are listening to them, we appreciate them, and we support their efforts. I think more often than not, residents sometimes feel city is coming in and telling them what to do. But if they feel they're a part of the conversation, they understand why we're telling them to do this. You create your programs and processes with them at the table. It creates a process that they can support and advocate for you in the community. Interaction is the key. You know, earlier I talked about the fantastic staff I have. And one of the things that makes them such great public servants is their willingness to attend neighborhood meetings, volunteer at events, be accessible, be out in the community. We do these bi-weekly litter cleanups where we try to encourage neighbors and residents to come, but more often than not, it's just our staff. And I have about 35 members of the community development department. I think yesterday about 29 showed up for the litter cleanup. So I think that shows our desire to improve Peoria. It shows the residents that we care. We don't live necessarily in the neighborhoods that we did the cleanups at. Some of our inspectors do, but all 30 don't live in that neighborhood. But we go because we care about Peoria and we live in Peoria and we care about every part of the community. So what are some specific programs that we have? Keep in mind that all of these programs, if anyone wants follow-up information on, we're happy to share. We're happy to provide you with all the materials we have. No point in reinventing the wheel. Or if you have programs that you do that are similar to those, we'd love to hear from you and learn from you as well. One of my favorite things we do is a good job door hanger. So anyone who's been at a field inspector or out in the code enforcement world knows that the first step to remediate a code violation is usually to post a notice on a door. So when residents automatically see a note on the door, they often get angry or upset or think of that in a negative way. So we wanted to do a few years ago is create something to recognize those that are making our lives easier. So it's a simple door hanger that goes right on a doorknob, and it essentially says, great job. We appreciate all the work you do in keeping up your property. And we appreciate what you do for our community. It was 2 or 3 months right after we launched this program, and we hadn't handed out that many, so not many people knew we were doing this. And I get a call on my voicemail, and this lady said that She came home that day for work and saw a notice on her door and immediately was really upset. She had a really bad day at work and just assumed that she was going to be upset with the city. And, she worked really hard. Her husband died the year before, but he always took great pride in the yard, and she tried to maintain it the best she could, but she thought she was going to be mad at us for telling her something was wrong. And when she got to the door and just saw that it was us recognizing how nice her yard looked, it really impacted her. And she just wanted to call and thanks us for realizing it. Thank you for noticing her. And I think that resonates me with the everyday when we see neighbors out who are just taking care of their properties so we don't have to be involved. And, we just don't use these when someone spends thousands of dollars on their landscaping. We use these for the property who may have, last year we told them mow 3 or 4 times, but this year they've mowed every time and we don't have any issues. It doesn't mean they have the best yard in the block. It doesn't mean they're investing the most money into it. It just means they're putting forth the effort to try to do their best. And that's what we use these to recognize residents with. One of the complaints we've heard in the past that I'm sure all of you have heard in the past is that code inspector just drives by. They never stop. They never get out of the car. They never engage with me. Well, that can be true on some instances. I can tell you the reason why that is happening. The city of Peoria, as I said, is 48 square miles. We have anywhere between 10 to 12 code inspectors for the entire city of Peoria. They are running from issue to issue to issue to try to stay on top of everything. They wish they had more time in the day to engage with residents. So we create this coffee with code event where we do a couple times a year in different areas to really invite residents to come to engage with us there. We explain with them that we're not trying to be rude if we drive by, we're just going from issue to issue. If you want to set up a time for us to kind of meet specifically, we're happy to do it. It's just been really positive and really well received in the community to have an opportunity to speak to us, get to know us, and also understand why we kind of do what we do. The other event we try to do on an annual basis is 100 blocks in 100 days. Essentially, each inspector canvasses 8 or 9 blocks, just knocking on the door, introducing themselves, leaving a packet of information on what programs we offer, how they can get involved, and just introducing themselves. It's just a way to get residents to interact with us in a positive light, not when they just have an issue that we have to get corrected. So from our good job door hangers and the success we've had those over the years, we launched Great Neighbor Appreciation Week. It's a week-long effort where we do a lot of litter cleanups. We really just spend the entire week thanking residents in Peoria for being great neighbors, which means, keeping your property maintained, being engaged with your fellow neighbors. And we spend the entire week, whether going to the Riverfront Market to support it, doing coffee with code events, doing litter cleanups, doing some other community engagement efforts, just really an entire week of showing the residents that we appreciate being able to provide them a service. This is a program that isn't necessarily an engagement opportunity for us, but was something that we leveraged our relationships with the community to really improve something that we felt was very important. We launched the Community First program back in 2020. It was a time where there was a lot of national attention on distrust between police departments and neighborhoods. And we thought as a community development department, what can we do to help our police department bridge some of those relationship issues that may exist? So we lucked out, and the way sometimes our system works is they do testing for police officers, and they get a list of police officers who will be going to the academy at some point, but the academy is a scheduled time of the year. So they created the list in May, so they knew which 12 officers they were going to hire, but the academy wasn't until September. So we pitched to our police department, hey, why don't you ask the 12 recruits who are going to go to the academy, do you even want to work for community development over the summer? They can be temporary code enforcement aides for us. We'll expose them to the neighborhoods. We'll get them involved. We will teach them what blight is. We will teach them the impact code enforcement has in a community. So when they become police officers, they're better prepared. 5 of them took us up on it, and they were embedded with our department for 4 or 5 months. They learned about when the program was over and they went to the academy, they'd already built relationships with neighborhood leaders. We had nonprofits come in every week and tell them and teach them what services they offered in the community. So when they came across someone in the public, they could tell them where to go. They could tell them what help was available. We exposed them to the different streets in Peoria, so they're much more equipped of where to go. And we just really embedded them with our department. Our mission and philosophy is much different than a traditional police department. And we exposed these 5 people who went on to become police officers with those neighborhood community first, and the impact that had on the 5 of them. And hopefully it continues throughout their entire careers as police officers to understand the role that they are public servants first, police officers second. And hopefully that was our way of using our relationships to really improve the relationships the police department has with our community. Some other things we do. We usually use any opportunity we have to really engage with the public, promote our mission, promote what we're doing. May is Building Safety Month. It's nationally recognized by the International Code Council as a way to promote building safety throughout your community. They have a great bunch of resources on the International Code Council's website. We spend the whole month promoting our building inspectors and our code inspectors. Same thing, we go to a lot of trade shows, a lot of construction events in Peoria. We feel if we can engage with the, excuse me. We feel like if we can engage with the construction community up front and get them to understand the value of permits and safety, they can relay that message to the customers. And then we can just ensure that we have a safer community. So we build those relationships. We go to the events. Someone's building a kitchen and they go to the expo. We can tell them, hey, you might need a permit. Here's the reason. This is what we can offer you. We can make sure to be able to provide that support to you when there are issues. Just a cool other couple events I'm really proud of. City Halloween. On a side note, I feel like any great engagement program has to have a great name. So these are 2 of my favorite. City Halloween, essentially, we have a beautiful city hall. It was actually voted most beautiful city hall in the country a few years ago. And it's 4 stories, older historic building. And essentially every department participated and people came through trick-or-treating. Luckily for the first year we launched it, it snowed outside on Halloween. So people wanted a safe place to go trick-or-treating. So we had 400 or 500 kids come through City Hall. And not only did we use it as an opportunity to get to know staff, but along the way, we educated them on what we do on a daily basis. Another thing we do around the Halloween time is trash or treat. Essentially, we encourage kids or residents to go out, pick up some trash, come back, throw the trash in the dumpster, and we'll give you some candy trick-or-treat style. We've really worked on our educational postcards. So traditionally, when we would send out educational materials in the community, it would be kind of a clip art or Word document with lots of words or looked real official. It just wasn't the most welcoming documents to get people to want to read or get people want to keep. So we created these postcard style things people can hang on their fridge that really talked about our information and kind of kept our branding up. The other thing is we really put forward our brand. Our brand is Appreciate Peoria. We want residents to know that our work and the job we do is about appreciating our community, appreciating them, appreciating the commitment that they have to improve our city. So we have a website. You guys should check it out, appreciatepeoria.com, or follow us on @AppreciatePeoria on Instagram. We're up to about 1,800 followers on Instagram. Pretty proud of that for kind of a smaller page, but our staff does an excellent job of taking photos of us at all the events. Being out there. You know, we have a fantastic communications director for the city. We kind of run things by her. We utilize her for everything we do. So really create those relationships with other people at the city who can offer their expertise about branding or marketing, because traditionally code enforcement divisions haven't done the best job of it. The last thing I'm gonna touch on is kind of the value of not only engaging with residents, but engaging with your community partners, and kind of how they can go hand in hand together. You know, you as a leader or a staff member, if you're going to be out engaging the public, it's one thing to engage with them, but it's also another thing to be able to have resources to point them in the right direction, or at least know what resources exist. So, you know, the key questions you need to keep in mind, what makes a resident want to engage with you? If you have an answer that can solve their problem, they're going to want to engage with you. So make sure your field staff know what tools you have available, who to call if there's a problem in the community or they can't fix. What's the quickest way to get that issue fixed? And then kind of what is the short-term and long-term solution tied to that? Some examples of programs that we have that resulted in our engagement efforts, because what we're hearing back from it. One of the things we learned from talking to residents is that sometimes they're reluctant to call our office because they're worried about what happens next. So for example, you call our house because your landlord shut off your heat, or he didn't fix your water heater, so the utility company tagged your heater. You're up to date on rent. You just, if you called us, we might tag your house. You would have no place to go. So we created a program, rehousing program, that we funded through a couple different settlements of property code violations at larger properties. And essentially what happens is, if you call us by no fault of your home, if we have to tag it as uninhabitable, you qualify for our program. And we then work to rehouse you in a different location. We partner with the local Peoria State Legal Services, which is our legal aid provider, to then represent you on the civil side. And we make sure you have a safe place to go and a safe housing option available. In the past, before we launched this program 3 or 4 years ago, we relied on our nonprofit partners to provide these services. Well, the problem with that is they do an excellent job providing those services, but they can't recoup those fees from the landlords that cause the issues. So by the city having this program up front, you not only have an ability to house residents, but then you have an ability to recoup those fees too from those that are causing the issues. We have a very robust, we engage with our legal aid community a lot. Code often refers tenants on eviction cases, so at least they're represented by the legal offices that can help them. They work with us on tenant education events. So it's really working with them on engagement efforts as well. The other thing we do a lot of is engagement and partnering with our homeless service providers. They have, and probably in your communities, a robust street team outreach efforts, so they can go out and engage and talk to residents who might be squatting in that abandoned house or might be causing those litter issues. So by engaging with them and having them engage with us, we get much more success in what we do. With that, I think we're going to open it up for questions, but before we get there, I just want to take another opportunity to say that while I'm the messenger for the fantastic work that the city of Peoria is doing, I'm just the messenger. I have a fantastic staff from top to bottom who believe in this mission, believe in this work, show up to events, care about the community. And I just want to give them credit for doing all of this over the last 5 or 6 years to get us to a point where, we can hold our head high when we say that we are living by the example of trying to engage and enforce before enforcement. But with that also said, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. We try innovative new things. I could do a whole slideshow on things that have failed. But really it's about trying to put your best foot forward and realizing the impact community development and code enforcement can have on our community on the front side of things can have a lasting impact. So thank you, everybody. And I think Liz is gonna then handle the question part of it.
I am. Thank you so much for that, Joe. I agree with all of the chatter in the chat that just hearing about the range of programs that Peoria has and the thought behind your work and intentional investment in making sure that there's funding for relocation services is just really impressive. So congratulations to you and all your staff for really being kind of leaders and innovators in this space. So I would just say if folks have questions, if you can add them to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, that would be really helpful for us to just triage the questions that are mainly for Joe. So I'll start with the first one. Related to the city cleanup events. You mentioned the success of those events. Are employees paid to attend those and are volunteers paid to attend those?
Yeah, so a mixture of both. We struggle with this. So in all of our litter cleanups, we've struggled with what's the best way to get engagement with residents so they show up, but also to use it as an opportunity to show that we're engaged with the community, even if they're not necessarily there. So we have tried everything. We have tried on the weekends. We have tried in the evenings. We have tried during the day. So we do ones throughout the year on the weekends, kind of on If a community neighborhood organizes it, and then we're really more of a participant sending volunteers. But for the ones I specifically mentioned that we do on a bi-weekly doing, as director of the department, I feel like it's very important that our staff is there. So essentially, from 4 to 5 on every other Wednesday, staff is allowed to go out to do it. So it's part of their normal workday. They love it. They get to go out out of the office on nice days. Well, some nice days. Last 2 weeks ago, it was super windy, and they still went. So kind of a mixture of everything. You know, we have tried different various times, like I said, but it just kind of, you know, it gets me to another point of where we haven't had success over the years is when we kind of force engagement on people. You know, we've tried to, hey, we think this is a fantastic idea. Everyone's going to love it. We're going to have 200 people there and 5 people show up. And that's when we decide what we think is good for them. So really it's listening to their feedback and more attending things that they're inviting us to, or they're taking ownership of, is where we've seen the most success.
Technical question is, and related to the program of embedding police department recruits into code enforcement efforts, are your officers governed by collective bargaining agreements, or like how did that come about and happen logistically?
Yeah, so the quick answer to the first question, yes, there's a collective bargaining agreement, but not when they work for us. So essentially what happens with most communities is you go through the testing, they've identified you, but until you go to the academy, you're not really a city of Peoria employee. So for that 4 months, they would have been working a different job, a security job, some other job before they go to the academy. Once they go to the academy, they become a police officer. So up until then, they were not. So every summer, sometimes we hire temporary code enforcement aides to help us with the process. So they were paid what a code enforcement aide would have made. It's much less than what a police officer gets paid because of those collective bargaining agreements. But they got paid what we normally pay a code enforcement aide was. And while it might have been less than they were making in a private job, definitely less than what they'd make as a police officer. When we sold the property sold the program to the recruits, they still wanted to take us up on it. And I would bet that all of them would tell you how valuable it was to them. So they were paid, but not by the traditional collective bargaining agreement for the police because they hadn't become police officers yet.
Got it. So I have a question here related to, you know, for all of us on the call, I think a lot of folks are drawing inspiration for the good work that your department is leading and wondering how that has translated to the city budgeting process. So do you have kind of more political support by these intentional efforts to showcase the great work that you're doing? And has that translated to like additional general funding line items for your department?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We have a very supportive council of the work we do. I'm not going to kid anyone when I say that every year during budget processes, when things get cut, that we don't get cut. I hope we get cut less because of the work we're doing and the value we can bring. But I think we've been cut so much over the last 15 years, like other departments. I'm not sure how much more you can cut us. We really saw the success of the branding and imaging and kind of reputation and quality we've built with our legislative body was it was preparing for this last 2 years. There's been more money flowing to cities and communities from grants and federal grants than probably in a really long time or ever. And we were in a position to be able to say, hey, the city's getting this huge this huge pot of American Rescue Plan money. Yes, it could go to infrastructure. Yes, it could go to this, but like, here's where it should go. So we are dedicated. You know, we're putting about $2.6 million of our American Rescue Plan money for the next 4 years, specifically for neighborhood revitalization efforts that will go to down payment assistance, housing rehab programs, demolition, neighborhood mini grants for our neighbors to use and really do engagement efforts, and some money for our land bank. And I don't think if we hadn't done as good a job telling this story and continuing to push this mission, it would have been as much funding. In addition, through the budget in 2022 and 2023, was the first time in about 10 or 15 years that we've added staff. We were able to get 3 or 4 additional staff added to us. So I do think it's paying off. I do think it works. I do think we've created quite a few citizen allies in the community who understand the value that we bring.
I think that's such a good point, in that public servants often undersell the incredible work that they're doing. And certainly nobody could have expected the massive influx of money coming to local governments through ARPA. And so just having this kind of intentional programs in place to be able to show the success and leverage some of that funding is great to hear. So a question about the mention of involving kind of police and code enforcement efforts in Peoria, and whether or not there might be some unintended racial equity issues that come from that. If like police are noticing specific code violations at a property and kind of use that in their efforts to intimidate folks in their property. So just would love to hear if there's been discussion about the connection between code enforcement and police enforcement and racial equity in response to those properties.
Yeah, you know, I don't want to speak for our police department, but in this sense, I think, you know, I think that's one of the values a program like this brings is for police. You know, traditionally a police officer gets hired, they probably just got out of college, they go to the academy, then they go through police training. I didn't provide any police training. And one of the caveats of the program was very upfront that they're not, when they're working for us, they're not police officers. They don't report to a police captain. They don't report to a police chief. They report to us. So every week we brought in our nonprofit partners, whether it's the Urban League, some of our community centers, some of our Center for Prevention of Abuse, around these social issues that affect our residents and affect the people that we're policing every day. So they understand what the community members are going through so they can deliver a better service. I think, you know, we don't use code enforcement as a weapon in Peoria. So when they're working for us, they wouldn't be using it as a weapon either. Our police officers don't notice code violations because if they started telling me about code violations, I would probably tell them to stay in their own lane because we will handle it like we should handle it, which means providing that education up front, working with the citizen to come to a conclusion that's beneficial for everyone. So could potential police officers in some cases do that? Yes, we haven't seen that experience with our police in Peoria. We've tried to get them to understand the value that properties can have. And usually when code enforcement isn't, you know, we make all of our code inspectors every year or so. We have a chief diversity officer at the city of Peoria, and she does some implicit bias and equity training with them. So they understand what their mindset in the community and how they should approach situations and what can make them a better employee. And when the police officers are with us as part of our program, they're going through that same training with the code enforcement staff.
Thank you for that. There's a question here about, Joe, you cited kind of studies on the economic impacts of demolition in a community and other works. I will say that Community Progress has some resources online related to the economic impacts of addressing vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties that are really kind of persuasive in what Joe had mentioned. So cleaning up vacant lots and that direct relation to decrease in gun violence, addressing properties and kind of the impacts it has on residential property values. So we can share those, we call them progress points, one-pagers. They're on Community Progress website, but we can share those as part of the follow-up to this presentation. Another kind of follow-up request, does Peoria have any kind of program information or resources that you're utilizing to help tell your story that other folks might be able to draw from easily to help replicate in their own communities?
I mean, we have lots of stuff we can share with people. My best suggestion would be, I believe at the end of the presentation, my email address will be up. Reach out to me, either myself or our neighborhood enhancement coordinator or a code enforcement manager would be happy to reach out to you specifically. And you know, we believe in this practice and approach, and we, I know we're kind of running out of time, but the work the Center for Community Progress does to move this forward, the plug I can give for them is, I've attended 3 or 4 of their national vacant property conferences, and I leave those conferences every time inspired to do this work going forward. And what inspires me to do this work goes forward is sharing best practices, sharing stories, sharing programs with all our other partners that are out there that are going through these same struggles every day with us, trying to put our mission and our efforts above that hard competition for resources and communities. So I'm happy to share all of that information. I believe we'll probably be doing a session at the national conference in September, Liz, in Chicago.
Mhm.
And I just would encourage anyone on the call who follows Center for Community Progress, if you to go to their national conference, if not this year, I think they hold it every year and a half or two. So, but they're fantastic. And there's 20 or 30 other communities just like us that'll be there presenting on what they're doing, and you can get a wealth of information there.
Mhm. Thanks for that plug, Joe. We didn't even have to pay him to say that. But yes, the Reclaiming Vacant Properties Conference will be happening in Chicago, September 7th through the 9th. Information is up on our website about that event. And I'll say that I first attended that conference working on issues of vacancy and abandonment in Western Pennsylvania outside of the city of Pittsburgh and code enforcement departments. So I certainly left it as a practitioner really inspired by the incredible work that other folks are doing across the country. So I'd encourage you all to check it out and to hopefully attend if you're able to. So we have a few more questions here, and it looks like we might have time for just one more. So I apologize that we're not going to be able to get to everything. But we do have a question that might be helpful to kind of center some of this work. So you mentioned the amount of employees that you have within the code enforcement department being like 12-ish. How many of those are dedicated to the kind of permitting and construction process? And then how many are dedicated to the inspection and property maintenance related issues?
Yeah, so when I mentioned code enforcement, specifically with those 12 employees, they are dedicated to code enforcement. So they're doing the environmental property maintenance, the residential property maintenance. And then we do have 4 or 5 other staff members who do the building inspection side and permitting side of things. So while they do code enforcement and they're engaged, it's a different kind of customer that they're working with. They're working kind of on the preventive, working with the contractors, working with the builders to ensure the buildings are safely built in the first place and can last a long time. So then code enforcement doesn't have to do property maintenance down the road, but they're kind of separate staff. So I think that it's important for them all to be housed under one department, but they do play distinct roles. But one of the things that we've been really successful to is how we onboard our employees. So not only is it so important to hire the good employees, but you have to provide them the training and onboarding necessary. So all of our employees learn about all the divisions in the department. So they can be a representative of our department wherever they go. If they see something out there, it's not necessarily their main function to do it, but they can quickly tell their coworker, hey, I saw that house over there. And I think the tenant needs some help. Can you send someone out there or talk to them about this issue? Or I think there's a contractor doing illegal work there. Can we check into that? And so it's just all working together with the common mission of improving and creating a healthier community for everyone.
That's great. I signaled that might be the last question, but one quick one. Does Peoria have a rental registration program?
This is not a quick answer.
Shoot.
We have a rental registration program. We used to have a rental inspection program, but they never fully funded it or staffed it. So we've had to make a lot of tweaks to get by with what we have based on staffing. I would love to talk about it much further because it's much more complicated, and I can share with you some great things that we've done to make up for not having a robust rental inspection program. But I don't think I have time in 1 minute to do all that, but my email's on the screen. So follow up and we can chat some more.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and take it there. I first just want to say sincere thank you to both Joe and Liz for pulling together a really great presentation and really getting into some very interesting topics around not just code enforcement, but how are we connecting code enforcement to people and everyday communities. So I want to share with everybody that we have some additional webinars lined up, and there'll be announcements about those very soon. So please stay tuned in for those announcements. Outside of that, please visit our website for more information and resources related to vacant properties, and have a great afternoon.